Welcome to the 5th tutorial for Procedural Studio. In the last tutorial, we learned how to create subgraphs and how to navigate in the graph hierarchy. And today we're going to look at how to manage our graphs in the workspaces. In order to look at the workspaces, we're going to go to this Graphs tab in the top left corner of the UI, where we can see our workspaces. If you have not created any workspaces so far, you're new to Procedural Studio, then it will probably look similar to this, with one default workspace that is called My Workspace. And a workspace is something like a Procedural Studio project, or the top level document where all of your node and graph instances are, and it's the sort of the root of the execution when you press execute. When I open this workspace, I can see all of the graphs that have been created, which is two graphs that we created in the last tutorial. One is the graph for the terrain shape, and the other is the one for the terrain texture. And we have to remember that this is just a flat list of all available graphs, so this does not show the actual hierarchy that we instantiated. For example, if I create another instance of this terrain texture graph here, you can see that now we have two instances of this terrain texture graph, but here we still only have one because there's only one that's available. This is like the template. Also, it's possible to create a nested hierarchy or even a recursive hierarchy. For instance, if I go into this terrain texture, I could actually create another instance of that graph within itself so that it calls itself recursively. These things are all possible, but as you can see, you don't see that hierarchy here. Again, this is just a flat list of all available graphs. Okay, I'm going to undo what I did so far because that was just for example. This will invalidate the graph, the undo, so I'm going to re-execute. And just to show you one more thing, if I were to select any three nodes, including a subgraph, and I create a subgraph out of that using the subgraph from selection button, I'm just going to call this test. It would create a subgraph out of those nodes and subgraph, and this subgraph task would then be available here in this list. And again, I could create further instances of it. Okay, I'm going to undo all of that and re-execute. Another thing that's important to understand about this list of subgraphs in our workspace is that they can have influence on each other. For example, if you remember when I created outputs for this terrain shape subgraph, the interface at the output of this graph was changed, and that removed a connection. So the parent graph was changed because a child graph changed in its interface. And if you have a nested hierarchy, then that can mean that these graphs will actually influence each other. Changes made to one graph may have an influence of, for example, removed connections in another graph. But, and this is where workspaces come in, these changes only have effect within one workspace. So you can be sure that any change that you make to a graph will never have any influence on a graph in a different workspace. Create a different workspace by going to File, New Workspace, Test Workspace. Any subgraphs that are in here will never be influenced by changes to a subgraph that I make here. You can see that this graph, this workspace called My Workspace is shown in white, while this other workspace is shown in gray, and this is because this is the one that's open for edit and execution. If I want to switch to this new workspace that I just created, I can click on this button which says Open for Edit and Execution. Before I enter, it will ask me if I want to change any pending changes to the workspace that I'm currently working in, I'm going to press discard. And now I'm working in this new workspace, which is still empty. I can create nodes in that workspace. It's just any random node. And now if I press execute, our terrain will not be executed. It will just execute this new function. This visualization is still an old one from the my workspace that we've been working on before. This is not updated. If I click on show results, it will show the results of this node. Okay, let's look at the other buttons that are available. This X obviously deletes a workspace, as you can probably guess, and this button reverts all changes that have been made to the workspace. So this is like an undo to that workspace. I'm going to do that. It's empty again, because all that I've done so far was add one node. And if I press delete, it'll ask for confirmation and press OK. And then I'm back in my old workspace, because the new one that I did for testing has been deleted. There's one more button that's available for subgraphs in our workspace. Is this one. This is just for renaming. One more thing that I'd like to explain is I can use subgraphs from other workspaces in my workspace by just dragging them in, and this will create copies of that graph in my workspace. So to show you that, I'm going to create another workspace again. Just call that other workspace. I'm going to open that for edit and execution. And I'm going to add any node again. And what I can also do is I can use these subgraphs from the original workspace in this workspace by just dragging them in. And now what Procedural Studio does is it creates a copy of that subgraph and all of its other subgraphs that are dependent, that it depends on. In this case, it's only one subgraph that's copied, and you can see the copy of that subgraph now available in my new workspace called Other Workspace. If any other subgraphs were used by this terrain shape that are in my workspace, those other subgraphs would have been copied to this new Other Workspace as well. And the last thing to understand is that you have a library available of subgraphs. For example, if I scroll down to this bottommost tab, there's one called Examples, which has some subgraphs with easy examples. For example, this one is called Rocky Noise. It's just a 2D function that shows you how to create noise functions. If I click on that and drag that to the main area, again, it will create a copy. And if I go back up to my box, this is the only one that I can actually edit. All these other tabs, these gray ones, cannot be edited. They're just for reading and generating copies from them. This is the one where I can have my editable workspaces. You can see that this Func2D Rocky Noise subgraph from the examples folder has been copied into my workspace that I'm currently working in. If I take a more complex one, like for example, if I go to the nature folder, there's a very complex graph that's an example for how to create the texture of a conifer branch. If I take that one and drag it to my current workspace, you can see that it will create a long list of copies of other subgraphs and create copies of those in my workspace, because all these other subgraphs are actually needed by this conifer branch texture subgraph. If I press OK and I go to my box, and I can see that all these other subgraphs have been created. And now if I press execute, of course it will execute all of the instances that are currently created in this other workspace subgraph. So now you know how to manage your subgraphs and you know what a workspace is and what it's used for, and you already also know how to open the library folders and use subgraphs from those available examples. Thank you for watching.